Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Transforming Course Reserves to Improve Learning and Faculty Engagement, which is sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide opportunities for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a couple of features of the webinar software. For all of you attendees out there joining us today, please know that you should be automatically muted and the cameras are not accessible to you, at least in this webinar. So don't worry about generating noise or feedback or anything like that. That should be all taken care of. In the main area of the screen, as I hope you can see, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. And we're using the Q&A feature today. Please use that to ask any questions of either of our speakers. At the end of the presentation, we have set aside a little time to answer as many questions as we have time for. So as your questions occur to you, please do drop them into that Q&A module. And as I said, we'll get to as many as we can. With the large group that we have today, we apologize in advance for probably not being able to get to all of your questions, but we will, as I said, do what we can. Also note that we are recording today's program and that everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. All right, and with that, that's enough out of me. So I will take this opportunity to turn things over to Jessie Ransom of Ex Libris.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jessie Ransom, and I work as the Teaching and Learning Products Specialist for Ex Libris. I work with Leganto, which is the tool that Adelphi is using to work more closely with their faculty. But a big part of my role is also to stay up to date with what's going on in teaching and learning and how libraries are working with faculty on their campuses. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to support libraries through this process. As a result of this, I've talked to many libraries throughout North America, probably many of you here today, about what libraries are doing to support course materials, what types of things they're struggling with, what their goals are, what they'd like to be able to do in the future. I've talked to libraries really all across the spectrum, some that are very heavily invested in supporting course materials, some that are very purposefully not doing very much, most that are somewhere in between. And especially with COVID, thinking about what is the right move coming forward, coming out of this, what will faculty need and what will students need related to this. Overall, what I find is that many of the schools that I'm talking to are looking for ways that they can do more to support their faculty and their students and provide course materials. Maybe a better way to put this is that they're looking for a way to better support faculty and students and to work more effectively as they're building these partnerships. And this is exactly what Adelphi University has been doing. And this is why I'm very excited about the session today. But before we get to that, I wanted to share a little bit of background information with you. Ex Libris partnered with Alterline, which is an independent research agency, and we conducted a survey at the end of last year where we surveyed students and faculty in North America with questions related to course materials. So how do they find them? How do they access them? How do they use them? How do they measure usage or student engagement? Things like that. We're working on the report right now and we expect to have it available in March. But in the meantime, I wanted to share a few of the results with you today. We snuck in some questions about the library here and about how faculty work with the library for their courses and what they expect of the library. So I thought this would be an interesting starting point for our conversation today. So the first one here is, how do faculty find new course materials? I think that this list is probably not super surprising. They find them through the web. They find them through recommendations from peers. What I want to point out here is how far down on the list the library is. Faculty don't think of the library first. And I think this is fine. I think this is something that makes sense. The library doesn't tend to be the starting point as you're thinking about which resources you want to teach in your course. But at the same time, we all need to know this and be able to work within this. How can we reach faculty where they already are? The second thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is the next one here. To what extent do you agree with the following statements? I'm satisfied with the level of support provided by my library for teaching and learning activities. This is great. Over 3/4 of the faculty that we surveyed said that they agreed or strongly agreed with this statement. But also there's quite a bit more room here because when we asked about how or whether they actually actively work with the library, it was closer to half who said that they are doing this today, and also about half who said that they would like to work with the library more. So there is definitely an opportunity here for libraries to really come in and help faculty more with their course materials. And kind of tied to that, we also asked what they would like the library to do. Of this list, purchase, license, and digitize resources was the highest, help reduce the costs for students, and also help with copyright. So these were the top 3 things that they said that they wanted the library to help with. This is, of course, very general. I think that the real challenge here is in understanding what faculty really need. Which resources should you purchase or digitize? Which resources are expensive, which could be purchased or replaced with something else to help with learning affordability? So how can the library work more collaboratively with faculty to provide the most impactful support? And also, how can you shift your existing services to make room for this more impactful support for faculty? We've seen libraries who have gone through this process and had great success with it, Adelphi being one of them. But I want to emphasize that working more collaboratively with teaching and learning helps the library as well. For the library to be able to help support learning affordability, to build new partnerships within the institution, working more closely with teaching and learning, with faculty, with instructional designers. This is only going to help the library. Being an obvious partner in student engagement and student success, working more collaboratively to help boost the use of the library collection and show your value, and also take part in broader institutional initiatives in a much more obvious way. So learning affordability being an example of this, student success being another example of this, to really be able to show the value that the library provides. So that's kind of where I generally am coming from when I talk to libraries about this, but I know that you're not here to hear from me. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jason, who will share a little bit more about what they've been doing at Adelphi over the last few years. Jason, over to you.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Let me get my slides loaded here. All right. Thank you, Jesse, for that introduction. So before I get into the content, I just wanted to share that, like many of your libraries, Adelphi University Libraries has had to be incredibly nimble and change-oriented to cope with the challenges presented by the pandemic. I think we can all agree that providing library services has not been easy in this environment. And part of my story today that I'm going to tell includes how COVID accelerated changes to our course reserves processes, but our story really begins well before the pandemic. So a little about me. I am Associate Dean for Research and User Engagement at Adelphi University Libraries. But I also come to this project as an adjunct professor in our first year seminar program. And I think that my experience as both previously a librarian at Adelphi, now an associate dean, and also as an adjunct professor really shed some light onto the multifaceted problem that we were facing with our reserves processes at Adelphi. So what I would like to ask first, and Mark, if you could load our first poll, is how much have your library's reserves and e-reserves policies changed as a result of the pandemic? Have you seen significant changes, few changes, or no changes? And then also, if you happen to have any particularly salient points you want to share about the changes you've made, you can use the Q&A feature to share those comments. So we'll give maybe another 30 seconds or so to respond. So how much have your library's reserves and e-reserves policies changed as a result of the pandemic? All right, so 58% of you are saying that you had significant changes to your reserves and e-reserves policies. 33% say few changes, and 9% say no changes. So I'm not surprised. I feel like a lot of us have had to make some significant changes in what we're doing. And we'll talk about some of the changes that Adelphi had to make along the way. So a little bit about institutional context. So Adelphi University is a medium-sized university on Long Island. Our main campus is in Garden City, which is just a few miles across the border from Queens. We have 4 sites total. Our main campus in beautiful Garden City, New York. We have a campus further east in Suffolk County on Long Island. We have a center in the Tribeca neighborhood in Manhattan, and a center in Poughkeepsie in the Hudson Valley. Across the 4 sites, we have around 7,500 students total at both the graduate and undergraduate level. Some of our more well-known programs include social work, nursing, education, and performing arts. In the libraries, we have our main library, Swerble Library at the Garden City campus, that houses all of our technical services and processing departments, and then smaller libraries at each center that support the curriculum at those centers. We have a total of 12 full-time faculty librarians, 4 adjunct librarians, and about 23 administrators and staff. So all told, we're a relatively small outfit, which presented its own challenges in making some of these adaptations. So the agenda today is going to follow sort of a chronological story of how we made choices along the way to arrive at the state where we are now with our reserves and e-reserve systems. So I'm going to talk about where we were, what we did, what's happening now, and then what we hope to happen next. So where were we? I'm going to start with 2 anecdotes about the use of our reserves. The first, panic at the copyright workshop. When I was a liaison librarian, one of the faculty that I worked with came to me after she had attended a workshop on copyright, and she was very concerned that she was perhaps not complying with copyright regulations with material she was sharing with her students in her Moodle course. Moodle is the learning management system that we use. So I offered to take a look, and did I find some stuff? She had a large number of documents of unknown origin that probably were not being shared according to the best copyright practices. So when I was questioning her about how we arrived at this point, she said it was just easier to throw her stuff in the LMS where her students were learning as opposed to using the library's reserve systems. And I'll note that today we're not going to focus much on copyright. It's more about the other processes, but this is what brought this one faculty member into the library to talk about reserves, is her copyright issue, but she wasn't ready to make that leap because of removing the content from where the students are learning. As I mentioned earlier, I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach a first-year seminar class called The United States of Misinformation. We've had lots to talk about in the past couple of years in this course, but I was very excited to build my own course from scratch when I started at Adelphi. So I started building my curriculum, building my syllabus out, finding some readings, and I went to our reserves team in the library and asked about how I could put some items on reserve. They directed me to an online form where I had to type in each citation completely by hand for everything I wanted to place on reserve and e-reserve. No way to upload a file or do anything like that. And then I learned that if I teach this class again, I'll need to re-enter everything a second time the next semester that I teach this course. And then I learned that for my e-reserves that I needed to do my own scanning and send those to the library, and they would put them up on the e-reserve system. And then I learned that these docs lived on the library website, separate from our LMS, from Moodle. And I said, I'm not doing that. Even for me as a liaison librarian who should be promoting this service, I didn't see the usefulness in using it for myself. So our second poll, as an estimate, do you think you have faculty who bypass your reserves processes? A lot, some, almost all of our faculty are following our processes, or I'm not sure. And again, you can use the Q&A feature to share any experiences you have or any comments on this question. So maybe another 30 seconds or so as I'm scrolling through some of your comments. All right, so only 5% of you say almost all follow our processes, but around a third say a lot are bypassing your reserves processes, and around a third say that some are, and 25% say I'm not sure, which is not surprising because often we don't know how faculty are using material in their courses. And a lot of great comments being shared in the Q&A, so thank you for sharing your experiences. So in February of 2019, I accepted the position of Associate Dean for Research and User Engagement at Adelphi. And one of my intentions was to take a deep dive into our reserve system and look at ways for improving them. So one of the things that I strongly believe is that one of the ways that libraries demonstrate value to institutions is addressing those thorny problems and those pain points for faculty and students. And oftentimes that means taking a look internally at the long-standing practices and policies we have and trying to understand where they came from, why they exist in the way they do, and how can we modify those to improve student learning. Because after all, that's our goal at the university, is to improve learning for our students. So at Adelphi, one of these issues was reserves. And even early on as Associate Dean, I got an earful from lots of faculty who wanted to email me or meet with me to express how dissatisfied they were with the services that we were providing. And so I knew that something had to change. So starting off, I set a few project goals for what I wanted the end of this process to look like. First of all, if I was unwilling to use a cumbersome system, how could I expect other faculty to do so? So I wanted to lower the barrier for use by faculty. I wanted students to have access to their research materials and their course materials in the place that they are learning. I do believe that the more barriers that are placed between students and course material, the more likely they are to avoid that material and not engage with it. So the least amount of barriers you can place in the way of students is important. I also wanted to automate staff processes and improve turnaround and streamline what was happening in the workflows, which I'll get to in just a minute. We wanted to bring instructors closer to copyright compliance, and I use the word closer intentionally. I'm really not going to touch on copyright today, but our instructional designers and our librarians, and many of you probably are aware that this is an ongoing issue and something that we need to address through educational campaigns with our faculty. And finally, I wanted to make sure that we were improving the accessibility of the material that was being scanned and shared with students. If we were relying on faculty to do that, then what is the likelihood that they're creating accessible scans for, say, students with a visual impairment? So where were we in our processes? As Associate Dean, I started investigating our reserves workflows to look for areas of improvement. And here's what I found. As I mentioned, instructors would manually enter citations into a form. And then this form is emailed, just the text of the form, to the reserves person. And I literally mean reserves person. I thought it was a staff, I thought it was a team until I became associate dean, and I realized it was just the one person who was managing all of these requests. And then our reserves person would print the form and add them to the notebook. And they would then proceed to process all of the physical items, moving things from the circulating collection to reserves that needed to be moved. They would then email the instructor to ask for digital copies of anything to put on e-reserve. And then when they were complete, the reserves person would move the printed form to the back of the notebook and notify the instructor that the request is complete by email. So I'm pretty sure that many of you had or have something similar along these lines. With this, there's so much manual processing and redundancy of steps that really decreases the turnaround time and occupies a lot of staff time in handling the same process repeatedly. So what did we do? In the fall of 2019, Adelphi University Libraries adopted Alma as our new integrated library system. And our implementation began in 2020. As part of our adoption of Alma, we also decided to adopt Leganto as our platform for reserves and e-reserves. And we would retire our existing reserves process and use Leganto starting in the fall of 2020. So our timeline: in January 2020, we had our official Alma implementation kickoff. In June, we had our Alma go live date. In June, we also, as soon as we finished with Alma, we started right into the Leganto implementation. Our Leganto go live was in August, and then we planned for a campus soft launch in the fall of 2020 and a full campus rollout for this spring. But as you can imagine, the best laid plans. On March 17th, Adelphi, like many universities around the country, closed for COVID-19. And as you know, like, this had a major impact on how our staff worked, how we were able to accomplish our goals and continue on with this project. So for us, we had an abrupt and immediate campus closing, like many of you did. And as we left, the notebook was locked in the library. So I didn't really know where we were. How many of courses were we still working on when we went remote, because no one had the notebook on them. Our staff shifted to working remotely, and many of our staff were working from personal devices. We didn't have the time to acquire and distribute enough university issued laptops to ensure that all our staff had them. So while we were in the midst of implementing Alma and switching to implementing Leganto, we had staff who were attending trainings on their iPads or sometimes their phones. So we were really in a difficult situation to be able to launch these products the way that we wanted to. So what did we learn from this part? That we needed to really examine what were we doing that is no longer relevant, and what do we have to do now that is imperative. So I want to talk a little bit about, like, the impact and the importance of the pandemic. So in Carl Weick's pivotal article about the Man Gulch forest fire disaster, Weick introduces the idea of a cosmology episode. He states, a cosmology episode occurs when people suddenly and deeply feel that the universe is no longer a rational and orderly system. What makes such an episode so shattering is that both the sense of what is occurring and the means to rebuild that sense collapse together. He goes on to discuss how in these situations, sometimes we have to drop the tools that we know and the tools that we're comfortable with and trust that new ways of making sense of the world and the things we're doing are necessary. And I think we can all agree that the pandemic has been a cosmology episode in many ways. And for us, this was a chance for us to really engage in this transformative shift from our previous model of reserves and e-reserves to something new and something that served our faculty and students better. So in this transformative shift, we knew that in the fall 2020 planning that we would be looking at a mostly remote teaching and learning workforce. And so we knew that online learning would require online solutions. So we chose to rebrand our reserves program as reading lists, moving away from the vendor name and calling it reading list to indicate that transformation to a new model. We also wanted to think beyond print and our collections, that we really wanted to have faculty think about the totality of material they want students to engage with in a course. So not just books and articles and textbooks, but also streaming media, websites, images, whatever it is that that faculty need to have students engage with to really impart that learning. We wanted to use that as part of this system. We also knew that our students would be out of the classroom and in a learning management system or in synchronous online system. So we wanted a direct link to this material in the learning management system. We knew that we would need to retool our staff. We had to move from our reserves person to really empowering the entire user services team to work on these reading lists and to think of fulfillment of how we're getting access to our materials as a whole and not in discrete parts. As I mentioned earlier, we're a relatively small operation. We also had previously had some scanning stations for document delivery, but we knew we were going to have to focus more on digitization. So we set up new socially distanced scanning stations in our workroom so that when we return to campus to work, that we would be able to meet this demand. And we moved from the print workflows in the notebook to using digital workflows in Alma and Leganto that allowed us to eliminate some redundancy and create some efficiencies in our staff work. So our summer 2020 pilot, as we were implementing Leganto, we had 6 highly motivated, and I'll add highly aggravated, faculty in our pilot. We recruited these faculty because we knew they did not like what we were doing in the past. And we really wanted that intense feedback that whether or not our plans were going to work and we're going to improve student learning and have faculty engage with the library more. So the range of our courses in the pilot were from a first year course all the way up to graduate courses. We had a small seminar all the way up to a course with multiple sections that shared a common reading list. So the lessons we learned from our summer pilot is the interface for these faculty to add material to their reading list was very simple and intuitive. I sort of threw them in without a lot of support and training, and most of them figured it out with minimal questions, which was a good indicator of what we needed to do to prepare for a larger launch. We did notice that our faculty still struggled with using the discovery layer to add materials to their reading list, but that's another problem that we'll need to resolve. And we also learned that we needed to open multiple avenues of communication so that faculty working on their list would be able to communicate with the libraries about what they needed, what they were having trouble with, what they were looking for. So our fall 2020 soft launch, we exploded from our 6 pilot faculty to 70 courses. Much of this came by word of mouth from our pilot faculty who shared their positive experience and how they wanted to continue to use this and what they learned over the pilot over the summer. And then we have what I like to call the happy accident. Remember the form I mentioned earlier that I didn't want to fill out because I had to type in everything for my citations, and then it went to the reserves person. Yeah, we forgot to take that form down when we did the campus soft launch. And it actually happened to be a very happy accident for us, or perhaps a bit of a negative, which I'll get to in our next steps where we're going with this. So we found a lot of faculty were still discovering that form and filling it out. And so our team just rolled over their reading list that they would submit on the old form into a new Leganto-based reading list. And then we would share within the instructions for adding it to Moodle. So we sort of drew faculty into the process through the happy accident. So at the end of the fall term, we did an assessment of faculty who used Leganto over the term. The responses were limited, but there were some telling things. First, we had one faculty member who said, I only heard about reading lists from the email asking me to take a survey about it, which made me laugh because I had receipts. I knew that we had communicated with him several times about this tool, but it indicated that perhaps this transition was an easy one for faculty if he didn't even realize he was using the same tool. Second, the library was fast in creating high quality digital documents. Our goal was to turn around even the most complicated reading list in 24 to 48 hours, and often within several hours of being submitted to the library for review, which we were able to do, and including any digitization requests that were put in. So I was very pleased to hear that comment. Students can find their reading list all in one place. That was one of our goals for this project. And then finally, now that I've made a reading list, it's done and easy to access from semester to semester. So I think this is indicating that we are reaching that point that we are lowering the barrier to use for faculty that we had that we were aiming for. So what are some ways in which the reading lists were used in the soft launch? So I have two samples here from social work courses. The first course, the instructor said, in her view, any barrier to accessing information, particularly in this graduate course where students were often working professionals and taking classes at night, means that students won't engage. They just don't have time to go digging around for things. So she spent a lot of time precisely organizing her reading list by the weekly reading requirements, had everything laid out in a very clear and logical sequence, and provided deep links or files to all of the required reading. Another social work faculty member said, I'm teaching my students to be researchers and scholars. And so she chose to do more of a loosely organized reading list where she would link to, say, the journal at the title level to encourage students to explore additional research. Both of these are perfectly valid pedagogical approaches, but it shows the flexibility in how faculty can, and how faculty can arrange their reading list. So where are we? So this is our socially distanced library squad. This is our user services team who worked behind the scenes, learning from home and then diving straight in as soon as we were able to make this project happen, all on our grand entrance staircase, socially distanced and masked in their library squad t-shirt. So, I mean, I wanted to highlight this photo because without staff who were dedicated to making these changes and improving this workflow, we wouldn't have been as successful with this project as we were. So where are we now? We are in the spring 2021 full campus rollout. We were able to stick with our original timeline. Over winter break, based on some in-depth conversations with some of the pilot and soft launch faculty, we made some configuration changes that drastically improved the experience for both students and faculty. Starting in January, we did a series of faculty workshops advertised by our provost office, and the attendance at these was phenomenal. We had 20 to 30 participants at all of these, and for a campus that size and an intersession, that was a pretty significant turnout. We really generated a lot of interest in the new system through those workshops. We're continuing to meet with individual departments to share reading lists throughout this term. We have created our implementation team for Leganto created a handful of short slide decks that our liaison librarians can use to talk about this service at department meetings. They're designed to be easy to use and then followed by a short demo. And then some of our staff can also attend and ask questions in case faculty have questions about how things work and turn around and those sorts of things. Over the spring, we are continuing to do improvements to our workflow, continuing to think about how we can improve the turnaround, how we can make sure that our staff are fully supported in the ways that we're utilizing this tool. And we are planning another end of term assessment to see where we are and what our next steps might be. So what's next for us with our Transforming Reserves project? I feel that that Leganto has been an accelerant to help us establish the libraries as partners in learning. Referring back to Jesse's survey about where faculty go to look for course material, faculty who are using the reading list are discovering resources that the library has that they can use to build a course. We're hoping that this can help to change the narrative that we are the fourth, fifth, sixth option for looking for new course material, that the libraries can be one of the top choices where faculty go to look for new course material. I wanted us to move from a burden to access to ease of access. I think back to the panic at the copyright workshop colleague who she had an amazing course with a lot of great material, but the burden of placing that on eReserve was more than was worth it for her to do that. So I really wanted us to move and think about the libraries as removing any barriers to access and making it as easy as possible. We've also been using this tool to demonstrate how flexible the libraries are. When we get our feedback from the pilot and the soft launch faculty about things that don't work or things that they wish they could do, we took that seriously and investigated if we could change policy, if we could examine the configuration and make changes that allowed the reading list to really meet faculty where they needed with their curriculum. And finally, this partnership and showing the libraries as a flexible partner on campus helps us open the door to act on bigger strategic initiatives that the library really wants to work on. So revisiting our goals, lowering the barrier for use by faculty. I think we've been able to do that. We've been fairly successful with that. The tool is super intuitive. We created some guides that help faculty to get started with the reading list platform. And we've even done some one-on-one sessions with faculty who need it. Ease of access to materials for students by having this direct link in our learning management system and working with faculty who've embedded even sections of a reading list within the entire course structure. We've really made that material front and center for students. Automate staff processes and improve turnaround time. Our turnaround time is vastly improved from before with a more print-based workflow. So I'm pleased that our staff has worked so hard to make that happen. Bringing instructors closer to copyright compliance. We've had a lot of discussions with faculty using this system about what we can and can't do under copyright. And it's been some interesting conversations where there are a lot of misconceptions around copyright, as you know, but having these conversations and really opening the door to talk about how the libraries can help to meet needs and still remain in copyright compliance. And finally, accessibility. We really focused in training our staff on using the software, the scanning software, to make sure that we're creating high quality and accessible digitized material. So what are our next steps? Well, first of all, there's the name. We decided to brand the product as Reading List at Adelphi. And in one of our first interactions with faculty, the feedback was that the name Reading List really feels tied to print. And after they attended a workshop, they realized that this was much more than just print. And so we're going to do some studies with some of the faculty senate committees to talk about how we can brand this in a way that really indicates that this is beyond just what you think about for reserves and e-reserves. It's really a new paradigm for sharing course material. We're going to continue to adjust our messaging to potential faculty adopters. One curmudgeonly faculty member who was a little reluctant to participate and use a reading list. After he used it, he said in a committee meeting, "I didn't realize how transformative this service was. I thought I was still going to have to walk over to the library with my paper forms and my books and do my own scanning." And we should really highlight that this is a transformative service and a new thing for the libraries. We also want to be able to use this to talk about how reading lists can help with the issue of affordability in higher education. We're looking this term at automating copyright approval process to take a little more of that workflow out of our staff. And there are tools within, there are settings within the tool that will allow us to do that. And we also, just a couple of weeks ago, Adelphi launched an open access policy task force that I'm chairing. And along with the OA task force and reading lists, we want to use this as a conversation starter to talk about OER, to really highlight the issue of equity of access to information and how libraries can help contribute to higher education affordability. So, with that, I'm gonna pause for questions and welcome my my good friend Jesse back. But it's been a wonderful experience and a great learning opportunity for us at Adelphi.
Thank you so much, Jason, for sharing the information about what you guys have done. I think before we get to the Q&A, I have my own question. So I'm going to go first since I'm the only one who can unmute myself. As you were talking, something that I was thinking about is, for the people who are listening today and maybe starting to think about undertaking a project like this with or without Leganto. I know you did this with Leganto, but obviously that won't be the right fit for everybody. What kind of advice do you have or tips do you have for libraries who might be reevaluating their course reserve service?
Right. So I think my first advice is to not be afraid to embrace change. We often become stuck in this is the way we've done things, or we have policies and procedures that have been around for a while. So I think the first thing is to not be afraid to embrace change. And the second would be to assess the experience from multiple perspectives. So I was a liaison librarian and then an adjunct professor and an administrator. And so really trying to see the problem from multiple perspectives and trying to solve that problem from the end user perspective. Sometimes that means making things more work for the library. Sometimes it means making things easier. And we happened to be in a spot where we were adopting this tool that helped us make that transformation. But I also feel like we could have made some of these changes even without the tool. The tool just accelerated our ability to do that.
Great, thank you. With that, I think we have quite a bit of time for Q&A, but I also believe there are a lot of questions in there. Mark, can you help us weed through them?
Yes, I've been sort of keeping an eye on them as they've come in throughout the presentation. So first off, thank you so much. There's to both you, Jason, and you, Jesse, for walking us through this. One of the questions that came in just a second ago that I think might be a good place to start, and maybe I'll throw it to you to start with, Jesse. So somebody just asked, what exactly is Leganto? Can you explain that for us?
Yes, that probably would have been a helpful place to start, huh? We'll finish with it instead. So Leganto is a tool that instructors can use to build lists of course materials, and course materials, as Jason said, being absolutely anything: library resources, non-library resources, uploaded files, videos, whatever they use in their course. And then it interfaces with Alma on the library side. So the library can see what the instructor has added, help provide access to resources, where the library can or needs to help with this. And then also the student accesses the reading list so they can see and access all of these resources. And from both the student and the instructor perspective, they interact with it through the learning management system. So they log into Moodle in the case of Adelphi or whatever the LMS is, and from there can get to Leganto and access all of their course materials. So it's a platform that instructors can use to build these lists together and present them to students, but also a way for the library to work very collaboratively alongside the instructor through this process.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying.
I'll also
that
say, I don't know if this will have gone through or not. Claire, I think, tried to put a thing in the chat. I don't know if the participants will have gotten that, but there's a link to our website. If that link doesn't go through, you can also probably just Google Ex Libris Leganto and find more information about it there. I'm also happy to answer questions. My email's on here.
Great. So another sort of follow on to that question from Gabe that came in just a couple of minutes ago. Is Leganto offered as a standalone product, or does it, do you have to use it with Alma?
It only works with Alma, so you do have to have Alma, and that's because of the integration with the library workflows. So, being able to route things to course reserves or digitize or whatever it may be, all that work happens in Alma.
That makes sense. All right. And then, as was mentioned, we have lots and lots of questions here. So if either you, Jesse, or you, Jason, notice one that you really want to jump on, feel free to just let me know. So one question that came in a little while ago from Stephanie is, and this I think is for you, Jason, who helps to promote your service? Is it the dean of students, the provost, the PR department, student newspapers? How do you get the word out? And the follow-on to that is, does the email blast to faculty actually, get people to use the service? Does that help?
So that's actually a very good question. And I will say that Ex Libris is really good about providing a campus engagement team to help you think through how you're going to roll this product out, which is crucial because it's difficult to think how you're going to encapsulate what this product will do. And the campus engagement team really helps you to think about assessment and messaging and who's the right audience. So for us, we did use the power of the provost office for the campus rollout to announce this. And that really jump-started a lot of interest in the spring term for this product. We're also using a variety of faculty committees to push this. So the Academic Information Technology Committee, the Scholarship Committee, the Faculty Senate Library Committee, as well as going into departments and asking for time on the agenda to share this. For students, I don't know if there's really necessarily much of a push for students because we're putting this in their face in the LMS. We want them to see it right there. So it's really about driving the faculty adoption. And we sell this by sharing how easy it is and how it improves your student engagement with material, and also letting faculty know that there are lots of pieces to this that I didn't discuss. Like, for instance, there's an analytics piece that can indicate how much your students are engaging with material that's posted. So we really have like a sort of a multifaceted communication program to reach the faculty about our reading lists program.
Excellent. All useful and interesting information. We've got a question here that came in a little while ago from Margaret, and Margaret says, once you return to campus, normal full time, your staff was going to have other responsibilities, perhaps like increased customer service and stacks management and those sorts of things. Her question is, will you be able to maintain the same turnaround time? But I would also sort of tag on to that. As you do make that transition back to in-person services, how does that sort of impact sort of the workflows and things like that more generally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Adelphi right now, we're operating about 20% of courses on campus, and that a number is reflected in traffic in the library, almost an exact match for our traffic in the library. And you're right, like we are able to focus on this more now, but I will add that for faculty and for processing, because there's a very easy rollover process from one semester to the next, that there's a lot of upfront work to create the reading list, and then the work is maintenance after that. So for instance, I didn't teach last fall my first year seminar, but when I build my reading list for the next time I teach this course, I can easily roll that into the next term and make any adjustments that I need to make. So for us, being mostly remote at this point, we can devote the time to learning how to have this quick turnaround. And as we go between semesters, it's really about a maintenance issue, making sure that links are still working properly, processing any new citations that come through from faculty. So I think this is a sustainable model for us going forward.
Excellent. We've got another question here, and I think you sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wonder maybe if you could talk about it even a little more. a question here from Benjamin that came through, and Benjamin says, did you get any pushback from faculty that didn't want things linked out to a reading list rather than posting them directly in the LMS?
Right.
Yeah, could you talk about that?
Sure. So we actually did, this came up in all of our workshops. Like, why would I use this and not just put it directly in the LMS? And the answer is that if you put a link, even a link to a library subscription in your LMS, and that link changes for whatever reason, the link is now broken for your students. And that's another barrier for your students to find that information. The way our process is set up, before we publish a list, our team spot checks all of the links to make sure they still work. So we're doing that work for you. And if something changes with one of our subscriptions, that's reflected automatically in your reading list. So you don't have to be responsible for tracking those things. Most learning management systems have analytics about how students engage with material in the course, but there's an extra layer of that analytics that's available in Leganto to show you how students are engaging with material. So yes, what I tell faculty is, if you just want to provide the link in Moodle, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But then you're the one who's going to be checking for those links every semester, right? Where on the library side, a student can mark a citation as link is broken. We see that and we can immediately investigate and fix it for all the students. So there are some advantages to partnering with us because we help you maintain those lists.
Great, great. And just to highlight maybe for some of the other folks on the line, we have a question here from Anne, who says that she would love to get the survey, the link to the survey that Jesse mentioned earlier. Is that available, Jesse? Is that something that folks can go and find like a white paper for, or something like that?
I saw that, and I saw that there are actually several more that are related to the survey or to the survey questions. You are getting a sneak peek today. We are writing the report right now, so we do expect to have it available in March, so not too far away. But as of now, I don't have any other links or things that I can share with you. So I'll have you on the edge of your seat for a little while we wait for that report to come out.
All right, that's good to know, and very interesting to get a sneak peek. So very cool. We've got.
There's one here, Jason. There's one I'm curious about. It says, how involved are librarians in the whole process? Do you assist with reading list curation? And maybe for me to change it a little bit, do you recommend resources for instructors?
So my apologies if there's some background noise. Apparently I'm a package being delivered and my dog doesn't like the doorbell ringing. So
of course, it wouldn't be a webinar without a dog barking.
It wouldn't be working from home without a dog barking or something, right? So how you're asking how involved are librarians with the process, right?
Yep, and I'm curious too, part of this is the question doesn't actually say this, but I'm adding a little bit. Do you recommend resources for instructors to use?
So this is something we wrestled with about how much to involve librarians in the process. So the way we've involved librarians is we bring librarians in at the point of creating a new course. So with the transition to online learning or creating a reading list, if the syllabus is established, we'll just process those results as they come in. But we do involve our librarians with faculty who are creating a new course and are looking for resources. Do we recommend resources? We don't, because our processing is done by paraprofessional staff, but librarians who are partnering with faculty who are creating a new course would be in a position to recommend resources. So there are lots of ways you can set up your workflows in Leganto. That's where we are at the moment. So we don't, for every list, make recommendations.
I was curious about that. Just so everybody knows, I didn't actually know the answer to that question, but I know we do have some libraries that do that. And especially, you mentioned that you're moving toward OER, especially in textbook replacement projects, where I think faculty do tend to want more help from the library in selecting their course materials. That's where I hear about that more.
Right. And I think as we using this and our open access policy discussion, I think we can start to talk about adoption of course materials. I will say that one of the interesting conversations we had, and I've noticed a few comments in the Q&A about how do we have physical reserves? How do we handle physical reserves? What are we doing? We followed the guidelines that a lot of libraries are using, and we require 72-hour quarantine for any item that's checked out, which makes no sense for a reserves item, right? But one of the things we did do through this process is we actually worked with a multi-section biology course, and they agreed to using an older edition of the textbook for reserve that we could buy cheaply and put multiple copies, so we always had one in rotation. So I did see that question. That's something that is a little off of Leganto, but something that we've been working on. But that's one of the ways that we made a recommendation for material is, how about if we just purchase an older edition so we can have multiple copies?
That's very interesting. Great. So a question sort of related directly to Leganto, I think for you, Jason, but maybe you, Jesse, would have a follow-on to this from Zorian, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name, is how difficult or time intensive was the implementation of Leganto to get it up and running?
So
from your phone, don't forget.
From your phone or an iPad. So we've been on an implementation blitz for a year, and of the systems we implemented, Leganto was the easiest. We went straight from implementing Alma, transitioning to Alma, and then Primo is our discovery layer. We went live with those at the same time, directly into Leganto. And by comparison, the Leganto implementation was fairly simple. There are some integrations you need to set up. There are decisions you need to make about displays and how that works with your LMS. The Leganto configuration menu is extensive, but Jesse provided some excellent guidance for us about where to look for particular areas that would be useful. So the implementation process for Leganto, I would say, was relatively painless compared to the other implementations we've been going through. Not that they're difficult, it's just it's a lot less work and a lot less intensive than a full Alma implementation.
What we tend to hear, generally, is that the technical implementation is not the hard part. It's more the, what you've been talking about today, rolling this out to faculty and, convincing them that this is the right approach, and that the library really can have a big impact in supporting them in their course materials.
Absolutely. Like the selling of this is more difficult than the implementing.
Excellent. I'm just scrolling through a long feed of questions here.
I know there are some questions on here that I'm purposely ignoring because they're very specific. How do you do this? How do you do this?
Yeah.
So just as a reminder, Jason and I both do have our email address up here. We're very happy. I'm just speaking on behalf of you, Jason. I know you're very happy as well to answer questions that maybe are a little bit more specific to your institution and what you're trying to do. So if it seems like we're ignoring your question, that would be partly why, probably, that we're trying to be more general here.
And there are a lot of questions.
And there are also a lot we might have just missed.
Right. Yes. Yes. So here's one that maybe to end on, that speaks, is maybe a little bit more general, as you were saying, Jesse, from Natalie. And I think it's for you, Jason. Natalie says, you talked about using the right tools to provide quality documents that are accessible and equitable. Could you talk about the tools you're using and how they're helping you to make the documents and things that you're providing more accessible and equitable?
Sure. So what what we wanted to do is make sure that each digitized document that we supply is a searchable PDF. So it's machine readable, and a student with a visual impairment can use a screen reader. It also tends to just clean up the image itself, and it makes the image smaller. Previously, we were just scanning images and they were kind of messy and throwing them out there. And I was like, folks, we have to do better. Like, we have to make this better. And I sold it to the staff as, I understand it takes more time, but this is an accessibility issue and we owe it to our students to do a better job. So we have a couple of older, I don't even know what model they are. I can picture them in my head, but they're 20 miles away in the office right now. And we're just using Adobe Acrobat Pro to create the searchable PDF. And that really was a key. Early on, we had trouble. The staff were complaining, my files are too big to go through. The files are too big. And so when I started looking, I was like, well, it's because you didn't make this, there were ways to adjust that. So we're just using Adobe Acrobat Pro to adjust the images.
Excellent. Okay, looking at the clock, we're fast coming up and maybe even have passed the hour mark here. So I will just once again say thank you, Jason, and thank you, Jesse, for first off the presentations, and then taking some time to handle lots of rapid fire questions. That's in some ways the most interesting and most difficult part of the presentation. So thank you for that. And to all of you folks out there who joined us today, we say thank you very much for taking the time to listen in and to participate. We really appreciate it. I would mention as we sign off here that you should have a link to a very brief survey. If you could take just a couple of minutes to fill that out and provide a little bit of feedback on the session, we would really appreciate that. And once again, thanks so much for your time. We look forward to hopefully seeing you on another webinar in the near future. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.